Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Princess Eye Patch. And if you are wondering, yes, I am a female equine, and I am beautiful. Now that that's out of the way, I would like to thank my friend Chris for coming up with a wonderful name for this YouTube channel. As a friendly warning to everybody listening, I don't use scripts, because scripts are for suckers and people with much higher production quality than me. So what is this video? What is this channel? Well, this is my little corner of the internet to talk about one of my favorite shows on TV right now, oddly enough, and that is My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic. Like most of the things I put on the internet, this is a exercise in thought. This is to get things out of my brain before they explode in candy-colored rainbows from my head. And while I have three other YouTube channels, I have three other YouTube channels because I don't particularly like to overlap my YouTube channels, and this content won't fit and go on any of those. My other channels are an audiobook channel, a travel channel, and a general gaming channel. You should go check them out, like, subscribe, do all that stuff I'm supposed to ask you to do. But this is a dedicated fandom channel. I probably won't talk about a whole lot more other than ponies on this channel, so yeah. So when you talk about full-grown adults, specifically males, I guess, because that's a big difference, liking My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic, which I'm just going to abbreviate to MLP to save time from now on, inevitably, you come up with the story. The story of how you ran into the show and how you came to like it. Now, I appear to be one of the few people that I know that went into the show knowing that I would at the very least think it was good. I might not like it, but I knew I was going to think it was good. Because most people, when they talk about how they got into the show, they said, oh, I saw things online, and some people said it sucked, and some people said it was really good, so I went and I checked it out for myself. No. I got into the show because years ago now, since this is the 7th year the show's been running, an army buddy of mine contacted me while he was on deployment and said, you know, hey, I'm trying to figure out, things to get my girls for, Christmas. They really like this show. Could you help me out? Could you hook me up? So basically, he was asking me to do internet legwork for merchandising for the show, and I kind of got into it from there, and interestingly enough, from, sitting there and watching things on Netflix with his kids, he actually got to the point where he really liked the show too, and helped, other people in his units buy merchandise also, and yeah, military bronies, go figure. But like I said, walking into it, I kind of knew it was going to be at least good. Maybe I wouldn't like it, but it was going to be well-produced and well-written and all that, because I was familiar with Lauren Faust's work. I'm not a particularly big Lauren Faust fan, but I really respect her work. The Powerpuff Girls, which actually had a lot more to do with Craig McCracken than Lauren Faust, but she did a lot of work later on in it, and a lot of work earlier on it in the art department. Her and Craig McCracken are actually married, and I'm getting sidetracked. We're going to do a distraction counter, probably, on this. Yeah, wasn't a huge fan of the Powerpuff Girls, but I always appreciated how brilliant the show was. And then we got Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, which I am one of the very, very few people, I know maybe one or two other people, that did not like that show. But I respected it, and I totally acknowledged that it was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I just did not like the main characters. I think Frankie was the only character in the whole show I particularly liked. I liked the old lady, too. but the main character was just too annoying for me. The next thing I want to address about the concept of liking the show as an adult is that it's not really in its fundamental nature a girls' show. It's a kids' show. It is more geared towards girls than boys, but we're talking about a 60-40 split, maybe. The show was produced in a way that makes it pretty standable for you girly, reactionary people. It's kind of like the concept of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles from back in the day. It was definitively a show made to sell toys to little boys, but it was pretty standable in both directions. It was still definitively a young boys show, but girls, could watch it and enjoy it and like it. It wasn't so over in one direction that it put off the opposite audience. So basically, if you can enjoy a smart show for kids, you'll at least not hate this show. I know a large selection of guys who don't, I guess, like the show, but they can stand it. Like, it's not groan-worthy when they watch it. They can sit there and enjoy it. And like my brother-in-law, for instance, after watching enough of it with me and my nieces and my sister, just looked at me and said, no, I get it. It's not something I would go out of my way to watch, but I totally see why you like it. So it's a kid's show, it's smart, it's well written, it's not obnoxious, it's not the world's biggest tea party. And by the way, if you do not know what that is, please do not go look it up. It's not worth your sanity. And in fact, I've never actually met a person, like, in the flesh, who wasn't just trying to be a complete and utter jerk about it, who hated the show, who was just like, oh, this is garbage. I met people who were like, this is not my thing, but most of them acknowledged that they got it, that they were like, yeah, for a kid's show, this is good, this is, at least as good as shows that nobody really questions an adult audience who are like Fairly Odd Parents or SpongeBob, although it's better than SpongeBob in my opinion, and I got no problem with SpongeBob for the most part. But it is, like I said, a smart, well-written, and surprisingly deep and meaningful show at times. It's maybe not up there in the deep, meaningful level with some of the other shows I'm going to mention, but it has its strong points comparative to them also. I'd also like to kind of, can't say point out, because point out implies that it's like a fact, and it's not it's an observation and a thought that I keep having, and that's that adults liking a show meant for kids is maybe not the best measure of whether or not it's a good show, because there's going to be a lot going on there. Nostalgia or just personal preference or whatnot. A better measure of whether or not a show is actually really good when it's, aimed at kids is whether or not kids continue to like it as they get older. The show's been running for 7 seasons. Both my nieces like it probably more now than they did when they started watching. One of them is a preteen, one of them's dangerously close to being a preteen, and they still, love the show, and like I said, probably enjoy it more now than they did before, because they can pick up on a lot of those little things that make it a smart, well-received show for adult audiences. As a kind of segue, and it's not a segue because it's not going anywhere, as an aside note and a short discussion, it should also be noted that I'm not a huge fan of adult TV shows, and I am not at all typical amongst the brony community when it comes to that, because I know tons of bronies who like any number of the shows that I'm going to talk about here, but most adult shows, and by adult I mean like shows made and produced for adults on TV, I feel that most of them are really kind of immature, stupid, lesser, lower common denominator shows when compared to even My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. And I'm not even saying that MLP is Shakespeare here, people. Um, and they definitely fall into the area of sauerkraut effect when it comes to this. So I'm gonna have to, of course, explain sauerkraut effect, since it's basically a term I made up for something that probably has a word for it in German, I'm sure. This is a very Schadenfreude type idea. But the sauerkraut effect is the concept of being exposed to something that you maybe don't hate, but you don't like, and being overexposed to it. And I call it sauerkraut effect because, let's say that you don't like sauerkraut, and you don't hate sauerkraut. If it's on your plate, you'll eat it, but you would never go out of your way to eat sauerkraut. But let's say your mother, every meal, she serves sauerkraut. You may slowly start to resent sauerkraut. It's taken up a place on your plate where something you might like better could be in every meal. Now imagine that your mother duct tapes you to the wall, sticks a funnel in your mouth, and force feeds you nothing but sauerkraut until you're 26 and a half years old. If anybody gets that reference, I really appreciate you. So my examples on shows that, adult shows that are like this for me, I'm going to give 4. I could probably give more, but I'm going to give the 4 most noteworthy ones and the ones that stick out most of my mind. First one is Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is produced well, it's directed well, it's acted very well. I am by no means calling it a bad show. I'm calling it a bad story. And it's terrible fantasy. Although I'm glad that the fantasy kind of has, succeeded in the mainstream the way it is. I could go into a bookstore and I could swing a bat and hit better fantasy than Game of Thrones. I would be hard-pressed to hit a political thriller that is better than Game of Thrones, because that's what Game of Thrones is. It's a political thriller with very lowest common denominator, crass, parts thrown in there. It's basically House of Cards if House of Cards had way more murder and rape and baby killing in it than it does. I can't get into it. I don't like any of the characters, and that's a big problem in a story. Another example is The Walking Dead. The Walking Dead, first of all, I read the comics. They're good, as far as that medium goes, which I'm a big comic book fan. The show is wonderfully made. The effects are great. Not that they're really hard effects at this point. It's well acted, it's well written, it's well directed. I have nothing but good things to say about the production of the show. But the world basically requires everybody involved, the characters, the world it's in, to be dumber than it really should need to be for it to work. Breaking Bad, another great example of a show that is absolutely brilliant, but I cannot get into, and it's not the show's fault. Some of these I would consider a real guilty pleasure if you like them, because if you like them, that's fine. I like things I don't consider good, or things that I consider maybe not as good as other things, or things that are really good in some aspects but terrible in others. And they're guilty pleasures. There's nothing wrong with that. Enjoy them, please. Don't let my opinion stop you. My fourth example, and the most erroneous one from the sauerkraut standpoint, is Sons of Anarchy. Man, Sons of Anarchy, the story in that is fantastic. Has some of my favorite actors in it. It's wonderfully acted. It's wonderfully produced and written. And I have this just terrible problem that I think it was the Nostalgia Critic summed up with the simple phrase, I don't care what happens to these characters. The characters in Sons of Anarchy are deplorable people, all of them. I don't like any of them. I can't sympathize with any of them. I'm all for shows where they take, like, people who would be the bad guy in a show and make them the protagonist. That's clever, but I can't do it. And I was overexposed to it. Most of the people I hang out with love the show, and I had to deal with it so much that I actually got to the point where I hated it. And I still kind of do, but the thing is, that's unfair to the show and the people who like it. I could have went and watched something else while they were watching it. So yeah, that's sauerkraut effect, man. Just where it's not that you don't like it, it's just it's not that you hate it, it's that you don't like it, and you've been overexposed to it. But it's a great example and a great way to articulate what I'm talking about a lot of adult shows are just this base lowest common denominator. It's all sex, violence, drugs, and murder, which have their place, especially if you're trying to watch something that is other, that is, apart from your life, that's detached, so it's kind of an escape mechanism. But it's definitely not more mature, is a good way to put it. It's less mature, if you want to be really honest about it. And that brings me to the point that I was getting to, although I'm totally going to count that as a distraction meter. And that is that kids programs actually get to be deeper and more adult now than a lot of adult shows. They get to talk about much more adult, deeper, harder to explain and explore concepts. Steven Universe, which I am fully aware of, I'm not a huge fan of it, I can watch it, but I can take it or leave it. It explores just the heck out of the question of what is family and what does that mean to you. Gravity Falls explores the concept of what is truth and, is that important in in our lives. Batman the Animated Series it's a little on the old side at this point, actually, because that makes me feel old, actually. But it explores loss and what it actually is to be a hero, and can one person make a difference. That's been explored to no end, but it does it really, really well. My favorite animated show of all time is Avatar: The Last Airbender, and collectively Legend of Korra, which is not a better show than Airbender, but I think I might actually like it slightly more. Those shows, oh my goodness, they explore just everything, just nationalism, racism, love, violence, war. Is it right to kill people? Genocide. Those shows address flat out genocide in a kids show, in a way that doesn't sugarcoat it. Forgiveness, what it means to be an individual in a larger universe, mental illness. Avatar: The Last Airbender, we get to see a person, a child nonetheless, go through a really visceral mental breakdown. And again, they don't, sugarcoat it. It really humanizes a lot of the villains. Not all of them, mind you, but a lot of them. And it kind of asks the questions of, are there really any villains in a story? Everybody thinks they're doing the right thing for the most part. And Friendship is Magic, it explores relationships quite well. Because in modern life, if the things that you see in adult shows are closer to your life than the stuff that's going on in Friendship is Magic, barring the magical pony stuff, you need to evaluate your life. The issues being presented in Friendship is Magic are actually pretty close to home, to the extent that I've actually had people tell me that they're a little uncomfortable with some of the episodes, and my answer is good. Smart shows should make you uncomfortable every now and then. A lot of the things that are addressed in Friendship is Magic that, make us sit there and think and maybe a little uncomfortable, they're good things to feel uncomfortable about. Things like, what do you do when you grow apart from a friend? Is there a point in a friendship where you just say, I think we should call this off? And, as an adult, you appreciate that in different ways than you do as a kid, but they're still both, very meaningful to you as a person. And world building, oh my goodness. World building and mythos building in the show are really great. I'll probably go into that in a different episode. But if you want to get me sucked into a show, world building is how you do it. I have nearly encyclopedic geek knowledge about shows I don't even watch because of how much I'm into world building. And MLP, in its current generation, the characters in Friendship is Magic are way more relatable than a lot of the adult programs I know. I know people like these characters. A lot of times in an exaggerated form, but sometimes not. And, the adult shows that we watch, those characters are exaggerated too. And in a lot of times, in a much dumber way. That sounds insulting, but I don't mean it to be. But, Ponies is a fun show. It's a funny show for the most part. Sometimes the humor misses. It's a positive show, which is actually kind of rare in the modern world. Even by kids' show standards, it's really positive. And that really brings me to the point that I really, really enjoy the show, and just, it holds a special place in my heart. And that's that I am a fundamentally cranky, curmudgeon-y individual, and it's really hard to be cranky and curmudgeon-y when you're watching a show about candy-colored ponies and the, power of friendship and how magical it is. I mean, like, seriously, I'm joking when I talk about that, but in reality, I'm actually being fairly serious. It's very hard to be negative while enjoying this show. If you don't enjoy the show, it's probably not true. If you do enjoy the show, it's very hard to be just unhappy or gloomy while watching this show. It lightens you up. And I really appreciate anything that can effectively, consistently do that for me. So in closing, it's a positive, fun show that actually has more substance than a lot of the adult shows that are currently out there. I'm going to start doing videos on pretty much just episodes, comics, maybe fan fictions, just anything that strikes my fancy. Put them up here. They may or may not have slideshows. They may be in a podcast or a vlog format, or I might try to work on my editing a bit. But either way, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you, blah, 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 later. Like, subscribe, do all those things that make me sound like a jerk when I ask you to do them. Have a good one.